If you thought the $700 PS5 Pro price was insane, well, Sony just dropped a scary reality check about the PS6. I was just reading through their latest financial call, and they quietly admitted something huge about the next generation. The affordable PlayStation is officially a thing of the past, and what is replacing it is not going to be fun for PlayStation gamers. For months, various leaks have got everyone assuming Sony was going to roll out the PS6 around late 2027, but this week, during Sony's fiscal year earnings briefing, President and CEO Hiroki Totoki basically hit the brakes on those assumptions. When asked about the rising cost of vital components, he stated flat out that Sony has not yet decided on when the new console will launch or what the price will be. And honestly, when you look at what's happening with hardware costs, there is a very real possibility that the next generation could price millions of normal gamers right out of the ecosystem. Right now, Sony is already seeing the warning signs. In that same investor call, they admitted that the PlayStation 5 sales are slowing down. But why? Because the console is still too expensive. Normally over 5 years into a console's generation, prices drop and late adopters get a great deal, upgrading from the PS4 for example, but Sony has flipped that completely on its head. They've raised hardware prices across the globe. This generation, the early adopters actually got the better deal. Right now, the base PS5 Slim Disc Edition costs a whopping $650, the digital is $600, and the PS5 Pro is sitting at $900. If Sony is struggling to convince people to buy into the ecosystem at those prices today, imagine what happens when they ask us for $1,000 or £1,000 for a PS6. It simply won't trigger that massive hardware, sales number, and sales spikes Sony needs for the PlayStation 6 to survive and thrive. So today we need to look at what Sony is dealing with behind the scenes. More importantly, we need to talk about their official plans to completely change how we actually buy our consoles, which is a bit concerning, because that shift could change PlayStation forever. And it all leads to one massive pressing question: is a PlayStation 6 actually going to be worth it? Or are we all just being conditioned to want the next shiny box, no matter the cost? The biggest roadblock for the PS6 right now is exactly that, the cost of the parts inside it. According to Totoki, memory prices are expected to stay extremely high throughout 2027 because global supply is incredibly limited. The entire tech industry is fighting over components for AI data centers, and Sony knows that launching a console right in the middle of a massive component shortage is incredibly risky. Because of these soaring component costs, gaming consoles are basically turning into luxury items these days. And I actually want to hear from you guys on this down in the comments. At what price point does a PlayStation stop being a standard entertainment system and start becoming a premium luxury item, that regular gamers just can't justify? Traditionally, a console launch is straightforward. Sony takes a loss on the hardware to get the physical box into our living rooms. They swallow the upfront costs to lock you into their ecosystem, knowing they'll make the money back later through software sales, subscription services, and the massive 30% digital cut they take from the PlayStation Store. But as we just saw with the PlayStation 5 and the Pro, that era might be over. If the PS6 targets the rumoured 24GB to 30GB of GDDR7 memory to handle, huge amounts of AI upscaling, the manufacturing costs are going to be astronomical. Usually Sony gets around this by signing long-term hardware contracts to lock in cheap component prices for, the next 5 to 7 years. But right now, suppliers are flat out refusing to do that. Hardware contracts are getting much shorter because suppliers know prices are trending upwards due to AI demand, so they want the flexibility to charge Sony more money next year if things keep going up. If it costs Sony $800 or £800 to build the console, They simply cannot afford to sell it to us for £500 or $500 anymore, which leaves them with a massive problem. How do they actually get a $1,000 console into our homes without destroying the brand? Well, during the same earnings call, Totoki specifically mentioned that Sony is running various simulations, that means looking at different strategies, and looking at fundamentally changing their business strategies. They aren't just guessing, they are actively preparing for a scenario where we can't afford the new PlayStation upfront price. Sony is considering several difficult options for the PS6 pricing strategy here. They could take a massive financial hit and heavily subsidize the PS6, but with current part costs, that would bleed them dry. They could just sell it at cost, say putting it on shelves for $1,000, but then they have the incredibly hard sell of convincing regular people and casual gamers to spend $1,000 on a console, especially when money is tight for everyone right now. Unless the PS6 has some truly unique, groundbreaking features that completely separate it from the PS5, it's going to be a massive uphill battle and a hard sell. If it's just another, incremental visual upgrade, like the jump from the PS4 to the PS5, I just don't see normal gamers buying in. Or maybe they need that killer PS6 exclusive game that helps sell the console. What could that be? Who knows? Or they could fundamentally change how consumers purchase gaming hardware altogether. There is a concept that's getting some serious attention and traction right now, and that is a smartphone style payment plan. As console prices approach the cost of premium electronics like iPhones, subscription based purchase options become way more advantageous for manufacturers. Heck, Sony even will rent you a PlayStation here in the UK right now. Any of the PlayStation consoles, you can rent them here. But I have to say this, I do not recommend renting your PlayStation. Over time, you basically pay it off, but then you have to hand the hardware back, so you kind of own nothing. Seriously, people, just save up for your hardware. We really need to get out of this mindset of needing everything right now, no matter the cost. Because when we do that, only the big businesses are winning, and we certainly are not. And that ties directly into another massive shift. Sony might not actually need you to buy a PS6 day one instead of abandoning the old generation instantly. Sony has the opportunity to let PS6 target hardcore enthusiasts first, who will buy all PlayStation hardware no matter the cost, while keeping the standard PS5 and PS5 Pro alive and available for years. But this extended cross-gen period doesn't help the PS6 sell more units, in my opinion, because what's the point if the same games are available on the PS5 and the PS6? Or could the PS5 base or the PS5 Pro drop off and we have one PlayStation 5 console and then the new PS6 consoles arrive, because there's meant to be more than one of them arriving, which we'll talk about in a second. But all this talk of $1,000 entry fees to get your hands on the new PlayStation and renting hardware brings up a very real, slightly uncomfortable question that I want to get your honest thoughts on. Are we actually ready for a PlayStation 6 right now? Or are we just being programmed by the industry to want one? The PS5 is officially 5 years young, but it feels like it still has so much to give. Modern AAA games take 5 or 6 years to develop now. We've got Grand Theft Auto 6 just on the horizon. If Sony rushes a PlayStation 6 out the door in 2027, almost every major launch game is going to be cross-generational anyway to, justify the development costs. So if the games are fundamentally the same and the PS5 already delivers great performance, is spending 4 figures on a PS6 really worth it? Right now, everyday living costs are climbing, groceries, rent, petrol, it's all going up, and then asking players to drop close to 4 figures on a console feels completely disconnected from reality. Now, Sony aren't alone with this. Microsoft are probably going to do the same thing as well. Plus, as someone who always tries to buy physical games, the idea of these massive digital-only ecosystems is pretty rough because they usually charge more than the physical game costs. Between the physical discs on my shelf and the digital stuff, from PlayStation Plus in my digital library, I have enough games to last me forever, so it's not like I'll have nothing to play if I stick with my PS5 Pro. Honestly, I think Sony would be better off beefing up the software support for the PS5 and letting this generation breathe for a few more years, instead of pushing us into another new PlayStation 6 box very soon. What if they brought back some older franchises we actually miss? Imagine if we got a new Wipeout, MotorStorm, Killzone, or Siphon Filter. Heck, what about SOCOM making a return? Let me know in the comments what dormant franchise you would actually pay to see brought back right now. Now, I think that would be money well spent, and it would attract and keep a lot more gamers a lot happier. Now, I do think a dedicated next-gen PlayStation handheld could be very interesting and get people excited. I know I would absolutely want to get my hands on one of them, but I'm not sure how that plays out alongside a premium home console, or how they both get priced without cannibalizing each other potentially. And that's not all. There's then the recent chat about a third PlayStation 6 console, which is a low-powered model that is basically the handheld but locked into a home console kind of form factor. Honestly, I'm not sure if fragmenting the hardware lineup like that is the best idea for PlayStation right now, especially when you see how well Nintendo has done with the Switch and Switch 2. It would be cool if this new PlayStation handheld could just be docked, so you could buy that and then you could get a dock. Is that going to eat into home console sales even more? I don't know. I'm just really interested to see how this all pans out, and I'd love to know all of your thoughts on this. But speaking of what we pay for, we need to talk about game length versus value. We are paying $70 and £70 for new games right now, especially if you buy them digitally, because they're locked at that price. You can usually get a good deal physically. But are we getting £70 or $70 worth of content? Are they worth it? I break down that exact debate, and I ask if shorter 20-hour games like the new 007 First Light are actually a rip-off, or are they worth it? Right here in this video, so click on that and I'll see you over there.